Hey everyone, this is a bonus episode with Shoma Chaudhury. We will introduce her at the beginning of the episode, so I won't do that here, but I will just say that this was for a Synapse conference that she puts on. We were talking for that last year, so this is an old conversation, over a year old, but there's a new one coming up in December, I think it is. I'll put all the links in the show notes. So I thought now is a good time to pull it up from the archive and share it with you because it hasn't been shared publicly yet here. She's really interviewed some of the most famous people in the world, I guess you would say, and she's a link sort of bridging all kinds of different people across the world. And these Synapse conferences are very interesting. That's how I came to find her. I think it was through Nick Bostrom or Jérôme Lanier or someone like that. This is just a good conversation about life and how we can be complicated humans in a complicated world. So I just wanted to share it with you. The next episode is with Hannah de Jager, and that's coming soon too. But for now, here is Shoma Chaudhury. Hello, Shoma. I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Andrea. It's wonderful to connect with you.
I discovered you through something called Synapse, which we could talk about a bit. This really amazing conference, which everyone can actually watch. It's even available, which I'll link to. And it was kind of technology and science. We could talk about it later, but soon I discovered you're a bit like the Barbara Walters meets, is it Christiane Amanpour? I never say her name right, but in India. So is that fair to kind of compare you to that? Because I came at it through this conference, but I'm still trying to figure out, you do so much. You started in many different places. So is it fair for me to bring up those names in a way?
Well, actually, this, at one level, it's presumptuous for me to say,
Of course, you can't say you're Barbara Walters or Christine Amanpour. I said it, but I guess let's just say you're doing political reporting or conversation.
Yeah, let's say their world of concerns kind of intersects with mine. Barbara, in the sense that I'm very interested in both sort of public framework questions, questions of urgent public concern and also intimate landscapes, of emotion and inner life and inner motivations. So, and I've also been an investigative journalist. So, in that sense, the concerns of Barbara Walters and Christian will possibly coalesce in my own canvas of concerns.
So the thing I connected with immediately starting to listening to some of your conversations was your ability to hold the space of either or. This research project is a lot about trying to understand how we think beyond dichotomy without necessarily rejecting opposites or rejecting differences. And in the way that you carry out your conversations, and by the way, for the audience, you've talked with some of the most famous people in the world, but you hold the nuance. So I guess to start, I want to figure out how you got into all this. And I wonder if there was a time in your life when you saw the world in a more contrasted way, or if there was a moment when you started to think about nuance.
That's a really interesting question. And one, thank you for sort of zeroing in on that, because I think my capacity to hold adversarial, viewpoints together, and again, to find it's not necessarily always trying to make them cohere, but to have a space where people feel understood and then disagreed with. So today I hold that as something that I'm proud of and that I think I've evolved to. Thank you for noticing that. But yes, it's interesting. I think when I was younger and when I first started out in journalism, I did have a much more adversarial approach to journalism, to public conversation. It was very much about holding truth to power in a, I would say, almost strident way. And maybe that has its place in a certain time. And I think it has great usefulness in society because it creates a kind of counterforce to many things. But, even then, I always believed in that those you criticize must always first feel understood, correctly represented, and then disagreed with. So that's a principle I've always held. But increasingly, as the world has become more polarized and, I myself have experienced life more, I think I'm increasingly interested in creating, I would say middle ground, not in a cop out kind of way. There's always a value framework that defines anybody's life. We're all very political beings just by virtue of having a value system you live by. So I won't say that I've abandoned my value system, but I've definitely become very interested in creating spaces where people with really opposing viewpoints can meet, have good faith discussions, concede what may be correct in each other's positions. And I've become really wary of being locked into any binaries, and that actually, and we can get into it a little bit more, but just at a philosophical level, I know that to be true of any of us, that we all live in different registers. Even those, and now again, coming to the kind of polarized world we live in, people we love, people very close to us in our own families, partners, friends, have, almost irreconcilable political positions, and you still love them. They still have wonderful sides. And to somehow make sense of all of that, it's become very important for me not to fall into the name calling.
Mm.
And now some of this again has seeds in my earlier years as an investigative journalist, where, at least to my own newsrooms and even in the stories I wrote, I always said that I did not want adjectivizing. And it's not enough to just operate from the righteousness of your own position, call people names, and then cancel them. So for me, journalism always was that if you are going to disqualify someone, it should be with facts. And you have to marshal facts in a way where uh, you obviously put a lens on somebody which makes them seem unpalatable, but it can't just be by saying, you're fascist and you're this. You have to marshal the facts to show that. So not hyperbole, not adjectivizing. Those are things that I've evolved. But yes, to come back to your original question, there was a more binary position about what's right and wrong. And now I'm much more interested in the complexity of human experience altogether.
Yeah.
And one other point, even about the binary holding people to power, is that those who sit in positions of power are often, they have to marry many contradictory positions and take the best possible decision in that. So, it's not really possible for those who really occupy complex positions of power to have decisions which are like, binary white and,
Mm.
kind of without complexity. So
Mm.
increasingly, I have an empathy for that, that you question, you try to nudge people to particular value frameworks, but it's not this fire and brimstone, almost punkish position of those who are outside the circle of power, uh, you know, just shitting
Mm.
on others without knowing what
Right.
it takes to sit in those places. Yeah.
Yes, gosh, but this is so difficult. And I know you've held power. I mean, you started your own magazine and so you know what it's like to be in a position where you have to hold a million positions and make a million choices in the way you were just describing too. And also, this seems like kind of the problem of our times in a way of how to still be. I've heard you use words like fierce and vigilant, and those are very important words for anyone. I mean, to be able to be comfortable with being powerful and yet to direct it towards a place that's coming from the right intention and that's not about you. I think this is really hard. And if we look at some of the things that do polarize, that's another word you used, that do polarize us, it ends up starting with something like feeling fierce about something and feeling as if we can't hold the nuance because it would be questioning our sense of self. In a way, does that make sense to you? That we get this personal kind of confused with maybe the larger objective or the action. How do you see that?
I see the world today as being so stifling in some ways,
Yeah.
because people get locked into their position. So you've uttered something when you were 14 or 15. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, again, for me, that comes from a very humanist position. And those, I think, go back to even my childhood or the story of yourself that you
Yeah. Yeah.
say
We
of
all
your.
have this kind of story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And my point is that when you're not allowed to evolve,
Mm.
and so that fierce vigilance is fine if it is undergirded with compassion. And I think with that capacity to understand that life means evolving. And I often say this, that even Gandhiji, the Mahatma, would have been cancelled in his 20s, because.
Yeah. Maybe you can unpack that a little for people who don't know about that time of his life, who only know him.
Yes, so when he first started out, he was quite casteist, and when he was doing his early work in Africa, he was speaking for Indians, but had a kind of like he had what would today be called a racist position on blacks, and that evolved, and
Oh, yeah.
life experiments taught him, and it deepened his understanding. And he was able to, he wrote My Experiments with Truth because he was constantly interrogating himself and shifting and learning and changing. And that process is now often denied to all of us, that you're so, and this is that tightrope of not giving people a sort of easy ticket where anything goes, but also not locking people into never changing,
Mm-hmm.
and if you deny that, then I feel you're denying the whole point of being alive, and you're denying people's essential humanity. And that's where I feel sometimes that, I would be, if I had to be defined, it would be as a left or center liberal. But I often now find myself uncomfortable, uh, with liberal positions, because it's so sort of fierce in its righteousness, that it again denies the heart of what I think being a liberal is to be able to evolve, to be more gentle, more compassionate, while standing firmly with the value system. So yeah, so I agree that these are the kind of problematic things, and that's why today I would locate my investigative journalism more in creating complex ground rather than in just purely adversarial ground. I think it's even more difficult and even more investigative to find those middle positions, and to acknowledge the complexity of things. So
Yes, because it's interesting. I think most people would agree with what we're saying, that life is nuanced when you're living it. But when we live it through our social spaces these days, it doesn't feel like that. And we are almost like two different kind of, or we're all many different people, right? Like that's why it's so hard to define yourself by these terms, like these political terms, because depending where you are in the world and depending which position you're talking about and which person you're talking about within that party, it means something different. But as you were saying, we all have our story, so we all kind of filter it through our own lens. So we think we're all talking about the same position, and often we're not. So I guess the point is that all of this gets very confusing, and what it seems like is learning a practice almost of all of us understanding in a way that all of these positions are dynamic, and it's a practice of conversation, which I think you kind of demonstrate in your work, is that because you're actually still very fierce in your questioning, and you're still, this word watchdog comes into my mind of, I think you were kind of a watchdog politically with your journalism. You could tell us about that if you want. But I also, now you're talking to a lot of scientists, philosophers, people in technology, people who own, companies that are kind of creating all of this technology. And I feel like you're still trying to hold them. You're still the watchdog, but you're doing it not to only provoke in the way that we seem to think is what we have to do to get attention now. That's a hard balance too, isn't it? Does that? Yeah, I
yeah.
wonder how you learned that too. That's a hard thing to learn, that practice.
Again, first of all, I really want to thank you, because I think you're picking on things that I value about myself. So it's wonderful to hear it articulated by somebody else. But, again, if I were to distill it, I think it stems from a position of genuine curiosity. So I think when I'm questioning, it's never from a pre-settled position. Like, I genuinely want to understand how someone else thinks.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I think is fundamental to human beings is that everybody operates from a position of feeling that they want to do good. It's very rarely that someone will think of themselves as evil, quote unquote, or
Right.
think of themselves as bad and operate
No.
from a position of viciousness.
But
So
we
I
also
think,
want to be liked and accepted and part of a community. And sometimes those feel at
yeah.
odds, I guess.
Yeah, but I'm saying, so when I question, or I seem to hold people's feet to fire, it's more out of genuine curiosity to say, how are you thinking about this? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what's worldview you come from,
Mm-hmm.
where you could, for instance, I think one of the conversations I had with Eric Daimler at Synapse, and he was Obama's advisor on AI.
Yeah.
And he was literally talking about, with relish, about labor compression that will happen out of the advent of artificial intelligence. And now the older, younger me would have said, would have canceled him for that. Whereas I wanted to understand, what is this mindset? And this mindset is driving the world. So it's not just enough for me to cancel that out. I want to understand, where does that stem from? What is that motivation? What is the framework within which you operate or think? And then can I like just open some window into your mind, which reminds you that you're not just an entrepreneur, but you're also a citizen and a parent and a lover and a
Mm-hmm.
friend, and that your decisions are going to have other ramifications. So I somehow find that today, if you approach things with more gentleness and good faith, you probably have a greater chance of getting through or having that moment of connection with people, which helps shift their perspective,
Mm-hmm.
rather than coming at it from a position of anger and outrage. So, one is that. The other is that I increasingly find that if I at least don't operate from this position of genuine open minded curiosity, that I'm myself not able to articulate my own truths. I find that very imprisoning. That again, the world is so polarized today that my inner self can see that some of the people that I would normally have considered my, say, worldview adversaries or political adversaries, that they have some seeds of truth in what they are saying, and I want to have the intellectual freedom to be able to concede that and say, hey, facets of what you're saying are right. They should give us pause. They should make us rethink, recalibrate. But here's the stuff that I don't agree with because it just doesn't fit with, say, a universal value system, which is of equity or justice or, you know. But increasingly, we are so locked into positions where the moment you concede something about someone else, you're immediately considered like you've sold out, you've gone over, and I find that intellectually uninteresting. And that's why for me, it's much more intellectually agile now to be able to cross across borders rather than to just, so, and I can give examples like, for instance, in our own context, in the Indian context, I would be a very proud Hindu, but would be opposed to, say, the right wing political agenda of the Hindutva movement, which is really deploying a religion for political consolidation. So, but so even while all my positions would resist, making, say, the minorities feel insecure or second class citizens, or use religion as political deployment, those value systems I'm clear about, but there are aspects of, say, cultural renaissance or default positions liberals had where you kind of denigrated your own heritage, you focus your modernity only on Western enlightenment. Now, those are things which are actually making me intellectually sit back and say, hey, maybe I had blind spots. And these were things, or the fact that you had cut yourself off from, say, the emotional fabric of people who are maybe not, like there's a class of people quite deracinated, world citizens, not necessarily so culturally rooted. And you kind of were not connected with the emotional truths of others or cultural truths of others. And I find that now a very interesting cultural phenomenon, so can I engage with those who I oppose and yet feel that they are also giving me a wake up call to recalibrate some of my own positions? I think that's much more intellectually honest and emotionally honest than being so vain about your positions that you won't shift from them, so and then in the American context, like I would be somebody who would be opposed to Mr. Trump's articulations. But in that, I was once doing an interview with Fareed Zakaria, and I kept pressing him on saying, if he's not articulating some truths that people are feeling, then why would he, say, win over a Spanish vote? Or why would certain classes of people be voting for him? Even some immigrant communities, unless you have that intellectual curiosity to tap into saying, what is he tapping into that we are missing, and I think that's very important to diffuse some of the sort of social political bombs going off all around us.
Yeah, that there's so many things going through my head as you're talking. I'll just spout out some of them. But first is that thinking, we often think of differences as like doors closing instead of portals opening, And the way you just explained it and the way I've been trying to think about it is part of this practice, right? Because it's a kind of a practice that, as I was saying, that we're trying to learn a different way of being together, I think, right now, because we've become so polarized. But if we see those differences as a portal, that sounds more like what you're saying, that okay, this man is getting a lot of votes and a lot of people really like him. That's a portal for all of us who don't get that and who reject that and whose body feels turned off by that. that's legitimate, but like also there's something there that we're going to learn if we look into that portal. How can we do that in a safe way, you know? Becomes kind of the question. That's one thing that came to mind. And another thing
Yeah.
is you brought up this personal accountability. I think that's very important because when you're having all these conversations or when you're in the public life, you know, a lot of us, a lot of just humans, it's very hard because you feel like you have to take a stance, and then the more you're seen, the more you're likely to be criticized. That's just kind of part of it. So it
Mhm.
becomes very hard to figure out how do you not defend yourself, you know, or and then you start holding on to these things. So I think one does have to do some really personal work. It's almost like spiritual work to kind of understand your intention. And when you're in conversation, to be sure you're the watchdog of yourself, you know, that you're, at least I'm talking from personal experience, that if I'm coming from that place where maybe I'm going to be wrong, make wrong decisions, we're all human, but if I'm trying from the right place, then I can admit that I'm wrong and I can sleep at night. And like, do you know what I'm saying? There's some
Yes,
kind of
absolutely.
personal accountability too to this practice.
Yeah, I think one other complexity to that, yes, there's a kind of lot of self-vigilance that's required, and that capacity for truth telling, first of all, to yourself.
Which
But
is not easy either, right?
yeah, but I also think that there's a tightrope to relativism, so it's again, and I guess everyone arrives at their own place of what is that balance,
Mm.
where you can't also arrive at a place where anything goes, right? So I don't
Mm.
want to take moral relativism to such a place where um, it's, you know, it- it's not that everything is okay.
Right.
Uh, there is something called accountability, and there is a value system, uh, which I think enough of human history has been lived to arrive at, as I said, issues of justice
Mm-hmm.
or equity for all. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
talking about equality in terms of that everyone has to be equal, but equal opportunity, that those are goals that one is striving towards. I think those are not negotiable, and you can't be morally relativist about that. And I also don't like relativism where a lot of journalism leaves things as he said, she said, he said, she said, and that I don't think you can necessarily be neutral, but you can be fair. And so these are things that I feel
Mm.
I've arrived at the nuance of, which is that if I'm describing a conflict, like I said, I'd like to correctly describe how Israel sees its own situation and how Palestine sees its own situation. But I'm not going to opt out, cop out, and say I'm neutral in that position. I'm going to marshal the facts to show why I take a certain stand, on something like that, where there is a morality involved. My only thing is that I won't do it by hiding uncomfortable facts or facts that don't fit or that make it a complex position. I'd like to articulate its complexity, as I said, make my adversaries feel correctly represented, and then disagree with them or point out why I think there's a value mismatch. So that definitely is a practice that, but I think it's also empirical enough for everyone to follow. It's not a
Mm.
subjective experience then. So
I think this is so true and so difficult. It's like holding the paradox. I mean, I think about it all the time too, of how to be. You just said it in a very nice way that you're, or a good way, that you're not neutral, but you're fair. Because no one's neutral, right? I mean, I think that's kind of the thing. We're all coming, we develop, we come from a certain place, we've learned certain things, and there are truth. I mean, there are truth. We can hurt each other, and there are things, these moving parameters are moving, but only in within certain other parameters, right? So there, I think it's like a different way of thinking, right? Instead of thinking there's one good and there's one bad, and you either know it or you don't. It's more like we're all coming at it from really different places, and yes, there are parameters that are shared that are, as you were saying, that we have to fight for. But within that, there's so much nuance. And the only way we're going to kind of get closer to hopefully changing things that so that life is better for more in the ways that matter, it's going to probably be by trying to understand each other's different positions a little bit better. But also that's exciting and a portal too, and it's not about smashing everything together and making it the same either. So there's this, we're both trying to hold this paradox with the way we're even talking about it, that is kind of hard, I think.
yeah, but
Have
as I said, I think that it's the interesting thing about it is that there genuinely are steps that one can take, which are like a empirical playbook, so that, like I said, it's not only a subjective thing, I mean, I think if the intention is there, then everybody with whatever shades they're arriving at, but the process to it is an empirical process.
And is it about research, or there's also this problem of where you look for the information, you can find certain slants. So when you're going about that, how do you, if you're going to look at an issue of that's very polarized, where do you, like, of course you can't give me like a absolute answer here, but how do you try to cover all that space? Because it's too much space for any one person to really cover fully. But
Yeah, I think mostly, like, if it's any one particular issue, then I always try to read up. If there are two sides to that, then, I'm not going to only read things which give me a confirmation bias. So in my news sources, I do try to read from exactly the people that I feel opposed to. I like to read what they're saying, because it's only if you understand, like I said, like, we're all trapped in different narratives of our own making. And if you understand somebody else's narrative, then let's assume you even want to fight it. You have to understand it to be able to fight it. If you're just fighting it with the blunt instruments of your own perspective, you're not getting anywhere. So I do find that I'm, yeah. So one is that I actively research from both perspectives. Even if I'm researching something like science, I do look at, say, the argument someone's making, and then look at everyone who's critiquing that perspective as well. So let's say, right now everyone has a frame where everyone's making the world a better place, but you start looking, and there are certain, like I said, there are some inviolable value systems, like how much energy are you using? Is it equitable? If you are going to use water and energy to some, insane level to create AI, then what is the distribution of that? What is the concentration of power? What is the concentration of wealth? What is the concentration of information? Who wields it? Now, those are not, it's not that you have to be anti-corporate, Again,
so it's transparency in a way.
Yeah, one is transparency, and also to know, like, what is, like, if they say they want to make the world a better place, let's acknowledge that you are talking about extreme concentration of power. And then talk to us about how you see extreme concentration of power as being a good thing. So once you articulate it, most people then can't hide from it, And you can, I mean, for instance, I often say a lot of the big infrastructure, like, say, laying the internet, you did need either governments or massive corporate behemoths to do some of that. You can't do that with just small players. So you can see some of the importance of being big, but when you're using up huge amounts of resources for extreme concentration, and you're not discussing how that can be distributed or how anyone can have a say on it, those things, like I said, those, it automatically becomes clear that there's an obfuscation here, So I think it's important for people, like I said, in good faith, lead them to describe themselves.
Yeah.
And then some of the untenability of their positions will become clear to themselves, Like, I can give an example, like, again, recently with I had a former Mossad chief on a conversation about the Israeli bombing of Gaza, And I know that this is, and you can understand the wound from which it comes, but, across the board, you can hear, many is particularly from government, or, even a lot of news outfits saying that the Hamas's sort of numbers on those wounded or dead in Gaza are not true, So rather than, like, just being nasty about it, I did ask the Mossad chief, I said, do you accept those numbers? And he said, no, they're not true. So I said, okay, you have great precision. You're the sort of best intelligence gatherers in the world. If you deny those numbers, what's your own estimate of numbers? What do you think has happened there? And he said, we don't really know. So then I just left it at saying, you don't know yourself, but you're denying what they're saying. So, where does the emphaticness come from? And just saying that, I think, made it transparent that there's a narrative war going on here. It's not that you're talking facts, It's not that you're, like, here they're putting out they're putting out an empirical number. You're denying that, but basis what, So just that, I think, immediately diffused, like, you get what I mean? Like, it
I do,
made
yeah.
clear
It's the power of conversation when conversation is done from this place we were talking about, I think, of curiosity, or that you brought up, of truly wanting to understand the situation, truly understanding that this is kind of the ultimate paradox, this one. And for me, I mean, it can seem so overwhelming. I think it's a great illustration of, it's almost just hard to even bring up, because people are going to lock into certain positions. It's so emotional, it's so passionate, it has such a history in the way that we were talking about, where we assume we're talking about the same things, but we're often completely assuming very different things in the same conversation. So I guess that's kind of is a great example of how to, if you can hold the space of just trying to understand that other process. It's almost like, I think of it as a different way or a different path in the world, and you're almost trying to kind of map it, right? You've got a completely different path, even though the terrain is shared, and as we all know, you can go up a mountain and from different sides and see completely different mountains. So
Yeah.
I guess what I hear you saying is you're holding that space with the conversation of how to explore a space you think from a different direction or something.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
Yes. Why, as I said, while not entirely succumbing to relativism, because I think that's also, that, and sometimes you feel a bit uncomfortable. Like, are you, uh, in that quest to understand others, one shouldn't lose a value framework, and that value framework, I feel like others may feel that, but I wouldn't, I would not give up on a value framework, which, as I said, I think human history has fought enough for, that uh, equal opportunity, a sense of feeling safe, etc., is important. But that's where, say, for instance, some of this, even in the majoritarianism that's taken over the whole world, I think what's important is to kind of decipher. And again, there are some places where the fight is just necessary, that it's a fight, because there's also so much of brainwashing, false facts, propaganda, all of that. So you can't really make space for a sort of accommodative space for all of that. So there is a time to be fierce. But I think, again, there, when say you don't want a majoritarianism politics, but how do you fight that while acknowledging that, while being a majority community, there may be some emotions that need respect, like,
Mm.
if indeed you have, say, the labor class in America feeling disenfranchised, it's not enough to uh, it's not enough to just delegitimize that emotion, or like, how do you engage with it, how do you give it respect? I think respect is a very, very important word, and
Mm.
at least in my experience with whatever conflict situations one has either written about or been engaged in, I think respect is a very, very powerful force, that if you respect people's positions and then disagree even very, very fiercely with it, um, that's something people can engage with, It's when all the name calling begins and you're like literally dropping everyone into baskets of poison. Then there's a huge contrapuntal force back, because nobody likes to be described as an asshole, So if you kind of respect people's emotions, say, they're feeling their jobs are being taken over, or that there's a hypocrisy going on about, say, let's take the veil debate in France, where, say, people feel that they have fought long and hard for, let's say, equality to be expressed in a certain way, or modernity to be expressed in a certain way, where the hijab should not be allowed. Now, how do you still respect someone's position and yet argue, so don't just call them jihadists, but respect that there's a certain cultural thinking there, and then argue that out, and then put out your value system for why it's not negotiable. You know what I mean? So that, but the moment you call someone a jihadist, there's an anger outflow back. Whereas if you say, yeah, okay, I understand that you feel this, and it comes back to that, like, respectfully represent someone's, position, and then engage with it, or dismantle it. You get what I mean? At least in your articulation, that's something that one can really do. So that
Do you have
respect,
some kind
really
of a
matters.
spiritual practice or some kind of, because or here's another way to ask a question. Like, have you ever been in a situation, I imagine you have because you're around so many powerful people, where they just, the power is just kind of the inertia, and it's almost like a bullied atmosphere to where, I mean, I think people often find themselves in these situations where it feels too powerful to resist, or the inertia is too much, and it's hard to do what you're saying we need to do, even to have the space to kind of catch yourself and do it. Do you know what I mean? Have you ever felt that? And if so, how have you managed to kind of learn how to deal with this?
Yeah. I mean, even in my own personal life, there's, professional life, there has been, very difficult circumstances where I have tried really hard to, you know, okay, so I just, before I sort of get into any specifics, I think, yes, it is hard to do. There are times when you feel that inertia, or you want to pick your fights. You
Mm.
can't be sort of fighting every battle. Like I said,
Okay,
someone
that's a
who's
good point too. Yeah.
non-negotiable,
Mm-hmm.
But the other is that I think what I learned from a lot of the tumult in my own life was to not describe situations or people as in their essence, but to describe your experience of it, because you can leave experiences behind. So let me explain this. Like, for instance, suppose I don't like some of your actions. I know that when people describe me as, they're again like kind of labeling you or describing the essence of you in some way which does not feel true to yourself, there's a lot of frustration or anger or like a pushback on that.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
feel trapped, and whereas if somebody says some things that you have done, because actions are external to your being,
Mm-hmm.
actions can be changed, actions can reverse, actions can be left behind, experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that you're like essentializing people. So
Mm-hmm.
that's again something I've learned through the tumult of my own life, whether it's with my loved ones, whether it's with my children, whether it's with professional people, anybody. I try and restrict a discussion about actions rather than essences, because I wouldn't presume to know the essence of anyone else. I can presume to discuss a set of actions, a set of attitudes or behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
but, so that's another kind of tool I've learned. But vis-a-vis taking on things that are very powerful, I think we all operate in our own, there's always a landscape of action, and some may have larger canvases, some will have smaller canvases. But the set of challenges in any canvas of action of being a human being, these things present themselves. It could be in relation to your partner, in relation with your children, in relation with a teacher, anything, and then
Mm-hmm.
telescope out to being presidents and prime ministers.
Right.
But I think the things we are discussing can change in scale, but the heart of it is still the same. And there again, there, like, if there's a insoluble situation, you have many uh, opportunities. You either walk away and you leave. um, there are times when war and violence is necessary, because you're really defending something which is inviolable. So again, we come back to that thing you had said, what's the intention?
Mm-hmm.
And it does require, I mean, when you say spiritual, yes, I've arrived at a spiritual practice, but I think this is all it begins with a conversation with yourself. What are
Mm-hmm.
you seeking from life? From your own temperament. Are you somebody who walks away? Are you someone who fights? What are the fights? And each, I mean, again, you can't presume to say that for anyone else. But
Mm.
for
Yeah, I mean,
yourself,
that's
there's
another
just probably.
paradox, that spiritual science. I mean, it's almost, that too is very nuanced, I guess. I mean, all of this that we're talking about could be thought of as spiritual in a way, in terms of trying to kind of be in the right vibration or place, as you're conversing. I mean, but again, people hear those words, science and spiritual, and it locks you into whatever your path is with those words, I guess. But
Yeah, I mean, the spiritual, again, because meanings have accrued around words, it'll always depend on which cultural position people are in when they hear the word spiritual. Personally, for me, exactly as you're saying, a lot of this constant clarifying of self is a spiritual practice. I've also been in very toxic situations where increasingly I find myself able to absorb toxin because I don't take things very personally, and that's actually
Mm.
come from a very, and it's been earned through fire. It's not something
Okay.
that I was born with, but I think arrived at a place of genuine self-confidence and peace. So I've
Mm.
been through a lot of very like roller coaster volatile situations, and in that I think the kernel of what I've come to, which is my own cell of strength, is to know whether you're at peace with yourself. Like, own are you looking yourself in the eye?
Mm-hmm.
Are you living by the story of yourself? It's not about what stories others have constructed about you, but are you good with the story of yourself? So for
Mm-hmm.
me, those are my sort of monastic cause. And increasingly I've been able to arrive to greater measure. Not sometimes it may slip, but that's my constant vigilance. I genuinely don't take things too personally. So even if a very toxic conversation is going on with people, again, like I said, work, love,
Mm-hmm.
personal,
Mm-hmm.
family, in any context, I am able to create that separation, and that not bristling about something uh, actually diffuses things a lot. And you're able
Mm-hmm.
to say, okay, like really, like, and I don't mean this in some sanctimonious way. It's not
No, I
sanctimonious.
know. It's also
It's
hard to talk
genuine
about. Yeah.
curiosity. It's just like
Mm-hmm.
curious, like really, like you experience me like that. And so again,
Yeah.
that sometimes you say, oh wow, like someone experiences you like that, then is there scope? If
Yeah.
there is scope for change, if you think it's unfair, drop it. If you think there's some kernel of truth, I'm quite interested in thinking of myself as clay. And like
Mm.
being a storyteller, you kind of, I don't think of myself as fixed. I think
Oh,
that's
that's
freed me
important.
up
Yeah.
a lot. That's freed me up a lot.
I think that's actually, yeah, that's really getting at something key, that there's a lot of different narratives. Again, we don't want to fall into relativism because there's not an infinite amount of anything goes narratives, but there's always a lot of different ways you can get to the same place, or a lot of different ways you could tell the story of a life. And we're different people in different contexts. That doesn't mean that we're not the same person, or that we're not all sharing the same world. So yeah, but as you're talking, I'm thinking of that's also a practice that I guess is just life, and it's lived when it's lived in the way that might be the most exciting and the most, like, I mean, if you think back 10 or 20 years from where you were and where you are now, and you've gone through a lot, that feels like it's worth living if you can get to that place where you can understand yourself as many different people, and you can look at yourself as possibly fitting into these narratives and decide if not. But I just want to say this is like a really hard process, I think, for a lot of us, and often it does take going through painful things. I mean, someone says something negative about you, for example, or and then it's hard not to react against that and fight them or hate them. And then some people devote their whole lives to then like hating those people who said that bad thing. So this is really important stuff we're talking about, and it's hard. I don't know if you want to share anything from your personal life. It's just this, I feel like, is the real crux of life, and it's what everyone is trying to figure out how to do, how to be okay with who they are
Mhm.
and still grow and communicate. That's a lot, but whatever comes to mind.
Sure. No, I mean, yeah, in my personal, some of it was, there was a kind of public disaster that hit my life. So I
Yeah.
can speak about that because it was all over the net. But, I think when I was listening to you, again, just like a core concept that's really helped me. And like I said, I mean, I've really had to walk through fire to arrive at some of these places of like inner equilibrium and
Mm-hmm.
homeostasis, which
Yeah.
just keeps me steady
Yeah.
in and my thing is that life, I think a lot of this also came from the journalism. So two things I'd like to chat about. One was I've really had to struggle with understanding when you go through very painful experiences or relationships or circumstances, that how do you um, how do you forgive but not forget. And I
Mm.
think that's a clarity I've really come to, that I have genuinely been able to forgive my past, people that impacted it negatively, even myself. Like I've been able to forgive even who I was for participating in some of those very painful situations.
Yeah, that's
Give your
important too. Yeah.
but then how do you not forget it? So you don't want to
Mm.
be like some wimp where like you're all just flowing.
No.
It's very important to be able to forgive that, because you want to move on, like, and that I think is a truly spiritual practice. Life is
Mm.
really transient and it's moving, and you don't want to be stuck. It's one life, like, or whatever, you may spiritually believe in many lives, but still your experience right now is one life. So how do you not stay stuck? So for me, um forgiving but not forgetting, and that really took me a long while to understand. So when I
Mm.
say not forgetting, is that to learn from your past, and you would not let a certain set of circumstances happen again. You would not let people treat you a certain way again. You won't let yourself behave in some ways again. So that's about learning, but then
Yeah.
you forgive it, and
Yeah.
that lightness of being, to know that you're evolving. You don't have to be stuck with the Shoma of the past.
No,
You-
but there's still
that
this
that
accountability.
gives you a lot
And
of ease. So
yeah, that speaks to what you've been saying too about not falling into relativism, because it's not that you just flow and everything is all fine or whatever. It's no, it wasn't fine, but you forgive it, you forgive them, you forgive yourself, you see it clearly, but then you're in a different place. Then you're not, it's not just everything is fine and flowing. It's that there is some kind of change that has been made. I mean, when you were talking, I was thinking about when you get your heart broken, right? Or and how it can you just want to shut down or something, or like not open up again, or you start, maybe you think you did something wrong, and it kind of, that's where you learn how to hold that paradox of, okay, like that didn't work, and you kind of have to separate your own self. And it's not a judgment of you, right? It's not taking it personally in that way. And there's
Mhm.
many scales of that, I guess, in all of
Yeah.
our lives.
Yes, absolutely. And and all this now sounds, I always say I love meeting people mid-journey. Usually you speak to people when they're very successful. And I often tell people that I'd love to meet people mid-journey through their tumult and their confusion, because, like I said, this can sound really sanctimonious, like, oh, you got it all taped up. But, I just want
Yeah,
to keep
no.
repeating, it's been a process of fire. It doesn't,
Yeah,
yes.
well, why don't you share some of that, or
Yeah, I
if you
mean,
want.
I'd be happy to. I will. I just wanted to say there was just something which came to me. Yes, we were talking about relativism, and I think the other thing that has freed me up a lot in life, and where I hope, fingers crossed, continue to have a kind of lightness of being, comes out of really understanding that, hey, life doesn't owe you anything. So,
Mm.
and that again comes from that capacity to look around you, and certainly there, my journalism has helped. So
Mm.
I have a self-pitying approach to life at all, because I really believe in endeavor. I genuinely believe that I'm a real, like, I genuinely work a lot. And like anything that comes, it's from the fruit of that labor. But for me also, the process genuinely is joyful. So again, it's like what choices you make.
Yeah.
I'd rather be poor than not, than do certain things. So with my work, it has to be a place of joy. So that's helped. But with the journalism, I've seen really, really good people suffer, with sort of political sort of persecutions, the finest people with the finest motivations, leading the toughest lives, then sort of painted black, wrongly framed, wrongly represented, pilloried by the media, spending years in jail. Or every now and then you'll hear of people, just in the bloom of life, accident or disease or
Mm.
loss, grief. Think of Gaza, or think of Syria, or think of Israel. I mean, just think of the way
There's so
people's
much of
lives
that.
go
Yeah.
up.
Hmm.
So I'm not again saying, my sister and I used to have this joke between us, whenever we'd kind of feel really sorry for ourselves, we'd say, okay, but think of someone with an amputated limb, and that as a metaphor just tells you that life doesn't owe you shit. So that perspective helps. You don't operate from that position of vehemence so much, while of course endeavoring at every instance to better your life, to expand your life, to improve your life, to do whatever it takes. But like, not, I think the key, and I guess that's when you said spiritually, is like not to take it all so personally.
Yeah.
Life is not personal ultimately,
Yeah.
actually.
And you're not just one static, stuck person either. I mean, that's the thing too. Taking something personally means you're comparing to something that's static, right? But you're moving, and you can learn and you can change. And
Yeah.
I think that's part of like the don't take it personally too. And also to your point about thinking of people who are in what seem like less fortunate situations, that's also a weird nested thing, because as we were saying, a lot of times when you go through difficult things, it opens you up. It opens you to another kind of consciousness, right?
Yeah.
It's not that we all want to court negative things in our life or like have any kind of sickness, but when you go through something that's really hard, you have to expand your consciousness. I think of like double consciousness with W.E.B. Du Bois. You have to develop an expanded consciousness, and it can actually lead to a richer or a different life, which doesn't mean it was right that it happened and it shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
And part of that consciousness is towards changing it. But all of this gets very complex too, right? It's not, and that's part of what I guess conversation and journalism is doing too. Because I was going to ask you, how did you, two things, like how you hold all these different knowledges when you're talking to so many different people. It's a lot of space, right? To go from talking to most famous kind of journalist to the president of this company to, you know, a famous actor. And like, it's a lot to hold, a lot of worlds. And also kind of how you found a way to enter all those different positions. Because I think a lot of this practice that we're talking about is understanding that there are so many different positions, even though it's a shared non-relative space. So is it just been the journalism too that's kind of taught you that, or personal relationships? I know your dad was a neurosurgeon too, so there's a lot of philosophy and neuroscience that comes out through your stuff too. So I don't know, maybe you can help me thread those, how you've understood all those different ways of being an embodied being in the world.
Yeah, that's a tough question. If I had to come down to just like one explanation for that, it would be genuine. And I mean this genuinely. You know, it's like not even it's not a stance. Genuinely, I'm moved by curiosity. You know, I like if I'm talking to somebody, there's no construct to it.
Did you read a lot of books when you were a kid, or did you
Yes.
watch a lot of movies? I mean, because I always find people who watch a lot of movies or read a lot of books, they also can develop this way.
So my father, you brought him. So not so much about the neuroscience, but he was in both my parents actually were doctors, and they both
Okay.
had an amazing zest for life and for nature, and like pretty simple in that sense, not worldly, but I would say, I mean, if there were sort of shaping influences in my life, like nature would be a big part of it. I mean, yeah, nature really, and like I'm never more, even on Instagram, like my team always laughs because I never put out anything. And the one time they said, "Can you please personalize your Instagram?" I put out a picture of a squirrel, or a tree, and they're like, "Okay, take this down. This is not getting you viral."
Oh,
But
I understand. I'm also not
and
doing the
I had
personal
to
stuff.
speak somewhere once, and they said, "Can you give us a picture which is not your public self?" And it was me in a like jungle pool, So really, my true love is nature. But so my parents, yeah, my father, not so much the neuroscience, but he had this kind of, I would say, like very much. There's a Vedantic thought, talking about spiritual, is like how do you act while being disengaged, So like
Mm-hmm. Oh, that
100%.
sums up quite a bit of what we were just talking about.
Yes, it's 100% involvement in the endeavor,
Mm-hmm.
but not in the outcome, And it's that, like, how do you live in that disengaged self while being like, I'm like a 9,000% passionate worker,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm still kind of a bit disengaged internally from it. And those, like I said, I mean, yes, it has come. I would really say curiosity, stories, reading, films, and meeting people. Like if you're a true curious student of just human living and
Mm-hmm.
being, you actually see that like amazing like explosion of stories around you all the time in people's lives, and and it could be famous people, it could be ordinary people. There's always a story going on beneath, and I think like by consuming that with genuine, like I said, not a construct of curiosity but genuine curiosity, like now this is a cliche but it makes you a student of life, so I think that helps me hold a lot of stuff in my head. And the other thing I mean, that's just being blessed with a very photographic memory. People do say like, how do you like not look at notes, not look at a
Yeah, I
TV?
noticed none of you never have notes in your talks, or I
Yeah.
haven't seen them. Yeah.
But for me, it comes back to that great desire to understand something. So when you
Mm-hmm.
actually understand something, then it's made sense, so it stays in your head.
Yeah, it's
So
a narrative. So
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
all
So
leading to the next thing. Yeah.
yeah, so I don't hang on to facts like just without the string, but because it's locked into, like I've understood it, so then it makes sense, and then you
Mm.
remember it. So I don't know if that, and I'm wondering if your audience is going to like kind of get lost with this conversation because it's kind of in the air, but
No, that's what they like. So the more like that, the better. No, but I do want to. As you were talking, I was thinking not just then, but throughout the whole thing, this kind of sense of presence and um of getting out of self in a way. So not taking yourself seriously, but also realizing there's this incredible world going on, right? And that there's a kind of presence which that curiosity speaks to, right? If you can be present to the people in front of you and their stories or the world around you and just everything that's happening, there's a connection there, isn't there, between not taking yourself seriously and that space of curiosity and awe, or kind of what you were saying, where you're disengaged but you're not, but you're active. Is
yeah,
that, yeah.
yeah, you're very involved with life without being sort of constantly implicated in it at every moment. Yeah, curiosity. And I was going to, again, it's a very esoteric word, but for me, if I kind of think of some tools for living, or again, and those I think are patterns. I think I had seeds of it myself, but when you're talking about the power of the story, because I've had the privilege and blessing actually to meet like such a massive canvas of interesting people, you notice some common ingredients, to a very
Mm-hmm.
richly lived life. And for me, wonder is another, you just use the word awe. So
Mm-hmm.
curiosity would be one. And I think like this, I possess it because I love nature, but like there's also like childlike wonder and joy. And again, joy. Now, as I've grown older, I've begun to understand just how powerful these words are. Like what does joy mean? Like to really have that sense of wonder about people's journeys, about nature, about just sunlight on leaf, or just like a little bird. Those things. Yeah, I mean, without like wanting to get into a cliche, if you really arrive at the meaning of that, it makes you quite this, like I said, that light traveler through life, because one, as I said earlier, life doesn't owe you, so that eases you up, because it's not particular, like no one's getting at you because your life's so screwed up. It's just the way it is, and you can look at anybody's life, and you'll find that underlayer of pain and grief and struggle in everybody's life. So it's not that personal. And then
Yeah.
the other is that joy is always available. So I think you were asking me to personalize some of this. So there has been, I was telling you, I think the peak of my career when in conventional terms, I was on top of the world. I was managing editor at Tehelka. And you earlier said about founding a magazine, but I co-founded it. The real founder was Tarun Tejpal, and he's a journalist.
Okay.
He was a close friend, a journalist, looked up to him. But he was accused of sexual harassment, which then later was represented as rape. And I was the managing editor then. So there was a big, huge, like
Oh
big
goodness.
scandal that erupted.
Yeah.
And by virtue of being many things, just circumstance, it was like one of those first viral stories,
Mm.
I think after Monica Lewinsky, this was like the next global viral story that
Okay. So this was over 10 years ago or so. Like,
yes, yes,
yeah.
around 2013.
Before
And
all the,
Me Too
yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think it was like that first big explosion of Me Too in
Mm-hmm.
India. And, again, not to get, and again, everyone's experience of it would be different. And when I say that, it's not to say relativism, it's genuinely to understand so I can only speak for my experience of it. But I know that for all the professional hard work I'd put in, and I was, as I said, on top of at least my canvas of the world
Mm-hmm.
and respected, had a body of work, etc. Suddenly I became a piece of fiction, like anybody could say anything about me
Mm.
because I happen to be the managing editor. I think I intervened with alacrity, again, with empiricism. And, I keep saying that I don't want anyone to take my subjective truth on this. There are
Yeah.
empirical actions, that you base a story on. So I say with empirical fact that as the leader of an outfit, we took immediate, urgent, transparent, collaborative action. But still, the accuser later, and what she was saying to me personally was, I'm so moved by the way you've responded to this, and it's helped me heal. And there were complex truths there. So it comes back to the complexity,
Yeah. So much nuance, but
complex
media
and
doesn't often represent it that way,
yeah,
especially not 15 or 10, whatever, back
years
then.
back. Yeah, it was literally, like I said, that first acetylene, story. And I did take and it was very difficult to do, because in a public maelstrom like that, I said the institution has taken immediate, transparent, collaborative action, which coheres with her and which prioritizes her emotions and feelings.
Mm-hmm.
But if there is a criminal case where someone's liberty is at stake, then one doesn't have the tools to investigate the truth of this. And my truth was that as the leader of the organization, I was given two competing versions of what had happened. So I took that position of saying publicly that as long as it was an institutional response, even the Supreme Court, there have been allegations of sexual harassment in the Supreme Court, even they did not take action with the alacrity and transparency that we took. But that's an institutional response. Now, if there's a criminal response, I cannot presume to be the arbiter of deciding whether there's a criminal action that's taken place. I don't have the tools to investigate it. And as the first responder, or what I thought I was the first responder, I was given two differing versions of what happened. And there were some empirical things which played out both of those. So in the public space, I could have really taken the easy, sort of popular position, and, completely sort of crucified the man in contention. But what I said was that here's what the institution has done. We have prioritized the woman's feelings. I have, and all of that is on record. You don't have to take it subjectively. But now that it's a criminal case, it's for the police to find out. And there were two versions of the truth, or two versions of the incident, and that has to be investigated. I was absolutely burnt alive for saying there were two versions. And that was a very difficult lesson to take, because
gosh, that speaks right to this difficulty of the either or and the paradox and the way we see the world through, just to say that two people had two different stories sounds like you're saying there were two truths, which isn't the same thing.
Yeah. And to say that this needs its own investigation, but because people wanted me to take the easy binary position on that. But there is, again, like, I can give you many other stories, but that, because it's a public one, where that really helped me clarify for myself, like, who I am, what I am, do I regret that position? And I don't, because as a woman, as a leader, as a journalist, as an individual, if all of that super painful maelstrom and catastrophe had to happen again, when I was in that position, I would say the same thing again, because that was the truth. That was the truth in terms. And then eventually the person was exonerated, the man. And I'm sure there's still layers of shades of where both were telling their own experience and their own truth about that. But that's what I'm trying to say, that there's a criminal legal position, and then there's the experiential, emotional, social, psychological position. And all of that, for me, though I was burnt alive for that, I would do it again, because and I can't lose that adherence to the truth. So I lost a lot in that. I lost public position. I lost, I would say, 20, 25 years of my work.
Because you resigned, right, afterward?
Yes, I resigned. For a long while, you lost your reputation. I felt I lost my voice, because that's when the whole Me Too storm was going.
That must have been so hard. Because I guess, like, I should stop for a minute, because I don't know all of this either. I mean, if people Google you, they'll see like that you're super famous in a lot of ways. I mean, Google you from the US or from Europe, and then also that something happened, like what you just described. So I'm really glad you just described it, because it doesn't really say what happened, and people could also take it whatever way they want. But it sounds like someone accused someone that was your your
my
boss or whatever that you knew very
yeah,
well of
yeah,
doing something, and you held both stories. You listened to the person. You told them you didn't say it wasn't true what she said, and you held this space. But then you were accused. You were exonerated, or you were criticized very heavily in the media, which I don't know, but I'm sure you lived through it. But you don't see it so much on the internet. I didn't search, but
yeah.
it sounds like you went through one of those really difficult situations, and you're still able to say that you did hold the space the right way, which is kind of amazing, actually.
Yeah, because I wasn't denying her truth at all.
Yeah,
I
and
was
that's
saying
that's the
that,
thing that matters. Yeah.
yeah, and it was just that how do you? But I can't. I could not lie and say that. And I kept saying that this is the journalism. Like everyone kept saying, "Oh, you're such a respected journalist," and And I said, "But you respected my journalism because I could tell difficult or hold
Yeah, or
difficult
open the space, right?
conversation.
Like
And
that's
why
the
did
hard part is
yeah, and
opening
why
that space. Yeah.
yeah, and now you're not allowing me the right to say a difficult truth, which is, I mean, yeah. But anyway, that's all
You're not
gone.
a judge. I mean, how could you decide all of this? But I think that's what we want in not we, but this weird thing that actually isn't any one individual, but is some kind of weird inertia of all people seemingly deciding as the media. And it's probably just like now it's just algorithms of getting attention, but I'm sure it was similar back then, right? It was going to be a big story, and so everyone kind of just repeats it because it's going to get a lot of attention. Yeah, something like that. And it
Yeah,
gets kind of almost hysterical.
yeah. And I mean, there were lots of hard lessons to learn in that. You can't speak into a tsunami. There were many strategic things I could have done different. But I feel at peace about the fact that I acted in really good faith with all the players involved. And that's what I was saying about sometimes having the peace of your own, like, are you good with yourself?
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think it's when you play games that makes you really vulnerable, because then you are trapped in like too many positions. I
Mm-hmm.
was with
Mm-hmm.
my own truth, my own intention, and I could stand by that. And I could take the hits for it.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
would not have been able to take the hits for something duplicitous or, um, manipulative
Yeah.
or strategic.
It's
My
very
way,
strong. It feels to me like real power, which isn't the kind of the way that word is used often, but and there's something about time I've thought of a lot during this conversation of how a different concept of time, because a lot of this is like this temporary hits or temporary grabbing of attention, and it's very hard not to react in that short time period to like maybe you could have tried to suddenly rectify everything and change your position or whatever, but you just kind of sat in the difficult situation. And over time it makes more sense, right? And people trust you because you
one
held
of
that
the nicest
space.
things that happened for me out of that, and it again talks about also not getting so trapped in the short frame of
Mm-hmm.
something. So,
Mm-hmm.
there's always a frame outside of that. And
Yeah.
if I believed everything that was going on in the media at that point, like close friends said, "Oh, like, in your place I'd have committed suicide," or etc. And I was like, I didn't feel,
Gosh.
I didn't feel I was I didn't feel I was something ugly. So even if someone's positioning me as ugly, I'm not feeling ugly. But the
Mm.
beautiful thing that happened to me from that is that I eventually got invited to give the Gandhi oration
Oh,
at the
wow.
University of New South Wales in Sydney soon after the scandal. And I asked and I'd gone into a kind of period of, I would say, like just below, because all my work blew up. So you had to start from scratch again. So I said, like, how did you reach out or why? And it was like one of the most wonderful things that happened, because the person who invited me said, because we watched you in that time of conflict and fire, and you behaved from very Gandhian positions.
Oh, that makes me want to tear up or something. That's very
Yeah,
beautiful.
it felt really nice. And,
Yeah.
and that again showed me that outside that layer of noise, there were others who, even in this time of frenzied media, could sift through. So if you're like, and that's, you have to have that kind of faith. But I
Mm-hmm.
just wanted to say one other thing. You were talking about tough lessons, where I feel I really grew there, and it was a moment of pivoting for me, because a little bit of that understanding about what detachment means came from a position of humility. So if I were to like distill everything I've been talking about, The immediate aftermath of that was a sudden fall from grace. Suddenly you're not invited anywhere. I used to like speak at forums across the world. I'm suddenly not invited.
Mm.
Lots of friends, even
That's
like
a
very close
huge.
to you want to meet you socially. You're like that
Mm.
pariah.
Yeah, yeah.
I had young kids, and so
Oof.
it was, and so just for a while, I was chaffing at that. Oh, like that went by, I wasn't invited. Oh, suddenly I'm not being asked to speak
Mm.
anywhere. I'm not on television. I'm not being invited to give my views on
Gosh.
anything.
Yeah.
And then I had this wonderful quiet moment again in like a forest walk behind my house. And I suddenly said to myself, I said, what's going on? Like, the tree, like I'm bemoaning not getting fruit, but the tree has been cut down.
Yeah.
So obviously the fruit's not coming my way. The whole tree is gone. And it was such a moment of like, again, I'm using these words and I hope it doesn't sound cliched and sanctimonious, but like these words to me have got reanimated with meaning. Like I had that moment of humility to
Yeah.
say big effing deal. Like shit
Yeah.
happens and it
Yeah.
happens to everybody. And I cannot grasp at the fruit when the tree is gone. So let's just start again, like the
Wow.
seed. And
Yeah.
that humility was so freeing. Like that,
Mm.
that's what I was talking about, like that acceptance that life does not owe you a joyride right through.
No.
So that
Yeah.
ability to take the hits without feeling over personal.
Yeah.
So today, if I were to count some of the things I'm proud of, is like I'm not bitter, I'm not angry, and I'm not like trying to. I don't feel any need for any bookkeeping on any of this. So that sense of
Yeah.
flow has
And in a
happened.
way, that's one of the biggest services or gifts you could give. I can say this, you don't have to agree, because that's an extreme example of a difficult situation where, someone that you respect or care about or that's part of your life is, I mean, we won't go into everything that happened, but it's just a difficult situation. And then to have to go through what you just described, where, literally it probably feels like overnight, all the things that you could have invested in as your definition of self were gone, right? Like all
Mhm.
these invitations and these things that people kind of live on as their definition of self. But that service is that you could hold that space and go through it and give that as an example. I think that's probably what I felt in your conversations. And I think that's what was trying to dig at, of how did you learn that? Because it is not an easy thing to learn, to hold the space and be, as you described it, kind of totally present, but not taking yourself personally, almost like watching yourself and still in awe and wonder, even as you're participating fully and actively and with vigilance. It's holding the paradox, I often say. So it's kind of it's a really big gift, right? That you went through that. So it's not for nothing, right? And I think it becomes more so over time, because all of us go through that at different scales, not the scale that you did, but in our everyday life, when somebody says something or hurts you, or you do something, even like you make a mistake and it's embarrassing, right? And then you have to kind of hold the space. And the more you learn how to do that, it's back to that practice, the more life opens up and the more you can be in a state of wonder and presence and engagement and curiosity. So all of this is connected. And now I have to also say I made a mistake earlier, because in a kind of embarrassing, because you were saying nature, and for some reason I heard Nietzsche, perspectivalism, but actually it's connected, right? This idea of in philosophy of being able to hold many different positions. We learn that when we can be in nature in the way that sounds like it's been very important for you. Like that story is very beautiful that you just told. And I'm imagining that you had that as a kid, maybe this nature experience where you can think of, like, for me it sounds like you kind of put yourself in the position of the tree or of the landscape or whatever, and it helps you to put these things into a different way of seeing them. So anyway, so nature, that's a very important
Yes,
word. And yeah.
yeah, that time we were talking on so many strands, I forgot to circle back on that. Yeah, so nature, it again connects back, I guess, with proportionality. I mean, I think nature gives you a sense of proportionality. And you're making me say some things which are like fairly, it doesn't sound so personal, but like it's really the textures of me is that even yeah, when I'm in like really difficult positions, I often like I might actually, like a tree really matters to me. There's that, it's like that reaching for light. So again, like I think one of those helplines in my life is to reach for light. You can either
Mm.
wallow in stuff or you reach for light. And like trees have that, it's that. So, and for me, like I was just thinking, I again, like it's from a position of humility that I want to say that all of this was enabled for me because I genuinely live in a circle of love, and I've been very, very, very blessed with love
Yeah.
in my life,
Mm-hmm.
whether friendships, my siblings, my sister in
Yeah.
particular,
Yeah.
my partner, my husband, unbelievable man, and then my kids, my boys. So right through this sort of, bobbing boat through life, some way or the other, like if you find love, and some people, like I've been blessed with human love in different forms, friends, siblings, partners,
Yeah.
kids, but professional love. But some may not even be blessed with that. But that's again, like you come to understand, like, you know yeah, like that was really a big source of strength, and that redemptive quality of love could come from many things. For many people it comes out of work, it comes out of it could come out of anything which gives you that sort of space of just being, like
Mm.
you're not having to prove. So it could be a relationship with music and
Yeah, music I think is, or nature
music
too,
or
right? Where you can
nature.
relax into the space,
You're
feel
just like,
bigger than all this other stuff somehow.
yeah, and of course the nourishment of human love is huge, and everything one says about love. And I'm not just saying romantic love, just the power of love. It makes you, it holds you very
It
strong.
does hold you, and thank you for bringing it back to that, because that was going to be my sort of where I wanted to go to end, because I think nature and the way that you described it, and also I was imagining, because you brought up your sister, and you can feel that there was family holding you, and again, family doesn't have to be the people that your parents and your sisters and your brothers, and you can find family in books and different groups and nature and music. We all find it in some way, but it's that sense of expansiveness, isn't it? Because we're all, I think this gets to the relativism too, in a way that things aren't relative. We are all connected, and it is a moving, ongoing thing, but there's wonder and curiosity is in a way relaxing into that wider space, isn't it? In a way, I guess we all, however we access that, it's very helpful in dealing with these situations that we've been talking about. Um, and maybe even it's what we're trying to open up with conversations.
Yeah, I think with conversations, I think the wonderful metaphor you used was about doors and portals. Like for me, the power of conversation is that, that you can't live many lives. You live one, which is your own. But
Yeah.
conversations is your opportunity to enter so many other life experiences, and
Yeah.
learn from them, take from them. So it's like so much of clay. And I definitely, like, I think I'm a pastiche of, when you admire somebody, you like, it's not just to admire, but to say, hey, like, what do I like about them? What is that attitude? And then how do you incorporate
Yeah.
it?
It's
You
like a
incorporate
pattern
that
or a
into
rhythm
yours.
or
Yeah,
something yeah,
it takes a lot
becomes
of
part of you.
yeah, exactly. And again, like that, you said movies, books, conversations, and also stories. I think, we underestimate the power of stories. Like we were talking about a story of yourself, or a
Yeah.
story of a nation, or like who are leaders and how do you move others, is your capacity to tell a story, and every circumstance is a story. And
Yeah.
color you put on something, the spin you put on something completely changes your experience of that, So
Mm-hmm.
that is, I think that, yeah, that love for stories and other people's journeys, it's, it also changes your experience of something, because if you shift the lens on it, it just, your whole reality changes,
Yeah, it does. That's why being brave enough to look at your own story and share it, and also opening, like what you're doing with your work now, there would be so much more to talk about, but you're opening spaces where people can at least have the chance to do that, right? In a safe space to share their story. And I'm sure that who knows how many people, but even if it's just one person who kind of hears your story here and needed to somehow have that portal opened. And then now it's like, okay, someone else has felt that way, so I can sit with it. It makes a huge difference. And I think we can't put it into words why it matters so much, but I really think it does matter a lot. So all that to say, thanks for the work you're doing, and thanks for sharing and being open and talking about all this with us today. I just want to send you gratitude for all that.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It was wonderful talking to you. And
Thank
you're
you.
a very sensitive, not just because you said so many nice things about me, but just your own search for things. It's like such a wonderful, sensitive searchlight,
Well, thank
So,
you. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's coming from definitely a place of just, I think, what you mean by curiosity too. So I think maybe that's how I connected with you, and it's opened up my landscapes. So in so many ways I didn't even get into, because a lot of the people that you had on the Synapse, which everyone I'm going to link to, quite a few of them were new for me, right? So this has to do with opening up new countries to one another too. I mean, you opened up some new things in that sense too. So yeah, thanks for feeding my curiosity.
please come for Synapse. The dates are there, 22nd, 23rd. So I really hope you come for it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything that you want to say before we go, or any comments, or just stuff you want me to know, or anything I didn't get to?
Well, that's so much, because I'd have loved to ask you things about you, and there's so many stories to tell. I just wanted to come back to that one note about forgiveness, because when you talk to
Mm,
people, there's
yeah.
a lot of that. So there's about forgiving others, but I just want to again stress that kindness to oneself. Like when you don't lock yourself into the positions of your past, that's I know I had to do that a lot. Like I had to sit in peace, and because you also participate in your own pain. So
Yeah.
you do things, you're attached to people who've caused you pain, and how do you forgive yourself for that is, again, I think, a very spiritual practice. It's not always just about the others, but freeing yourself up to be a free agent is
Yeah.
I,
I was gonna, I mean, maybe we can talk about it another time, but I was gonna ask you about that vulnerability, or because, we didn't talk about like being a woman, but when you're a very strong woman, right? And you're also like in a position where you're a public, strong woman. And so just thinking of that, and how you're not gonna always be right, I guess. Like nobody is always right. But when you're publicly um, make a mistake or something, like, yeah, I guess that vulnerability, I was going to ask you, like, how do you stay vulnerable to yourself? Because I catch myself sometimes, where you're supposed to be in a position of authority, right? I'm supposed to be a philosopher. So if someone knows something about philosophy, you kind of like I have to catch myself and try to remain vulnerable, or remain humble is a better word, not vulnerable, but do you, yeah.
yeah, I do. I mean, I would say again, external knowledge. I used to be. So that would have been my younger self. Now I'm not, because it's just like, the world is so huge that there's
Mm,
no would know everything. It's just
yeah,
possible. So
I
I
see.
don't try to hide from that. But the woman factor, yeah, like I think being called a strong woman, there was a lot of some of the position, and some of the turbulences I've been in life, and with, again, mostly I would say with attachments to people, the illusion of people that you've sort of wedded yourself to,
Mm-hmm.
and in some ways then you're participating in pain which would not be your normal public construct.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I was saying, that that takes real courage to sit with yourself and see yourself outside all the constructs, and genuinely forgive that for me was very freeing. I keep trying to, like, that's genuinely something I would love to gift um, people in pain. The And a lot of my friends who've been in difficult positions or whatever, I keep saying, just try that. Like, it's really hard. Like, it's a gift I want to give people, of like, how do you just sit with yourself, let your thoughts flow, and see them. It's like, again, that bringing back that idea of cinema and a story. Like when you drop all those facades and defense mechanisms and constructs, and you can just sit with yourself. I guess it's meditation, but it's not even conscious meditation. It's just like letting it become transparent to you, letting yourself become transparent to you, you know? And when
Yeah.
you see that and you can cringe and you can, like, you know, say, oh, what version of myself was that? You
Yeah,
know?
like watching a movie where sometimes you can hardly
Yeah, yeah,
watch
it's
it.
like watching
Yeah.
a movie, you know? And that's, for me, that has been very, very liberating, you know, to be able to do that. So if at all I could use this conversation to gift that to people, is to really, I've repeated it 2 3 times, but to say, you don't have to get so locked into being just that one version of yourself,
I
you know?
think it's worth repeating because it's not something like it's one of those weird things that if you know it, you know that's really important, but we never talk about it. It's not really like in our public persona because I think that's why I brought up this vulnerability and stuff or because it seems like you're not supposed to admit that there might be hard things to watch in your life, even though we all know there are, right? But when you do your Facebook page or your Instagram, you're not supposed to show that
Yeah,
stuff. So but I think it's great that you did say it a few times because it really is this practice of what we've been coming back to in different ways, this theme of not taking yourself too seriously, but being very present to yourself. That's the weird paradox you learn how to hold. And also learning that you are an important, unique being, but you're changing all the time too. And so you can look at yourself as you would a book or a movie in a way, and you can change the story, you know? It's a real powerful thing. And I do think conversations help that. Like, you know, when I watch you in conversation, I'm learning that pattern, right? And so that you've gone through all this stuff in your life, and so you can hold this pattern, you can hold this space. And in a way, just watching you do that becomes a lesson, even though you don't, because you can't speak it. You can't say, like, here's what you do. I mean, you've
yeah,
tried in this conversation, and there's a way we can point to it. But in truth, a person has to go through that a few times before it becomes something that you can sit and watch and do, you know? So,
I
yeah.
just wanted to end with one scientific fact, which
Okay.
again would be a perfect metaphor for everything we've been talking about. I just read about it yesterday because I want to get someone with gene editing at
Ah,
Synapse. And it's like just the marvel of it. So that's again my point, you know, that even when, say, I'm like age reversal or some aspects of AI or even gene editing, you may have social dilemmas or ethical issues. But first of all, I just want to marvel at the intelligence of people to think, like I keep saying, like, how did someone even think that death is not inevitable? Like, I just want to marvel at that level of intrepid thinking, you know,
yeah,
before I
right.
start
How did you
debating it.
even
I
get to
want to
that
just
place?
salute
Yeah.
it. But anyway, so the fact I wanted to leave this conversation with is that apparently, as an adult, we have 27 trillion cells in our body, and that's undergoing like a billion 100 billion mutations every day, you know, like that's how mutating we
Whoa.
are. Day you're mutating a billion times, you're like,
It's
you know.
crazy. But what
So
stays the same is the pattern. I mean, in philosophy, it's a kind of ship of Theseus thing, right? Because there's, again, it's not relative. It's not that you're just totally a new person because you have
yeah,
patterns, but you can
of course,
shift those patterns, you know? And that's
yeah,
how we kind of open new worlds. And that's why when something strikes you as so contrary to your own patterns, it's a portal. It doesn't mean you need to take on that pattern. That's why I said do it safely. And I think that's why we were talking about all this presence and research and stuff, because it's not that you just take on that, but it is, you know, it's showing you that there's other patterns in the world that are very different from yours. You might be able to learn something, might be
yeah.
able to open something.
Do you mind if I just say one other quick thing? When you
Yeah,
just,
no, not at all.
I remembered one other tool of, you know, which has helped. And I think, again, it's not relative. I think that really does help people. Is that coming back to the power of conversation? You know, I acknowledge my loved ones, my siblings, my husband, and all of that. But there was a particular friend who I have had like a stream of consciousness conversation with over 10 of the most tumultuous years of my life, you know. And that space to just talk, you know,
Mm-hmm.
is being, it's again the power of conversation. It allows you perspective, it allows things to breathe, you can laugh, you know, it externalize like the Ferris wheel in your head. When it's out there and in a safe space, it just suddenly you can see it, you know, and
Yeah.
It's not a cycle in your head anymore.
It's
And
so funny you say that. I literally was thinking of that today. A friend was going through something and and talked about it and then kind of said, gosh, it's so good to just talk about it. And it is. I mean, even if you don't have someone to talk to, you can write it out or
yeah,
just get it out somehow, right? Talk it out to yourself. I mean, I
yeah,
guess it's what people do online too sometimes now is just do it in a truthful way, to
yes,
yourself.
yes. It comes back to the power of conversation. It's very healing. It's
Yeah, it is. And friendship is so important. And I think all of this is a model too of being friends with yourself. And also it can be with books. A lot of us read books and we find ways of externalizing our own stuff or listening to other people's conversations. And I guess the point is somehow look for a way to have a conversation about it or listen to a conversation about it or watch a conversation about it. It helps.
that sounds
All right. Well,
okay.
I've just loved this and I feel like I could talk to you forever. I love that we just went to where we did. And I think it feels like somebody probably needed to hear all this, whatever this was. So I really, really thank you for doing it, for going there and yeah, talking about it.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I love talking to you as well.
It was
Thank
great.
you. Thank you.
All right. Bye,
Okay, bye.
Shoma.
Bye.